Okay, well, welcome to another edition of Open Source at CJUG. This is Josh Juno and with Bob Paulin here. And today we're going to be presenting Jakarta EE, Adopt a Spec program, Jakarta WebSocket, and Apache Jackrabbit. So to start off, just to give a little bit of information about us, my name is Josh Juno, and I'm a Java EE and Jakarta EE developer by day. I also do lots of database administration, work with Java SE, of course, along the way as well. I'm an author, presenter. I'm a podcaster for a couple of different podcasts on the Clubhouse network, a Java champion. Also a member of the JCP. I'm a member of the Apache NetBeans committers and the EE4J Mahara committers. I'm a board member for the Chicago Java Users Group as well. Bob?
All right, Bob Paulin. I'm an independent consultant out of Chicago. I do a lot of Java EE and Java SE development for my clients. I'm an Apache Software Foundation member, so I'm very big into open source. My work with the ASF includes Apache Tika, on which I'm the PMC, and then Apache Felix, in which I'm a committer. I may also do a number of talks around international conferences. I'm very also involved in the local community through the Chicago Java User Group as the board chair. And like Josh, I am also a Java champion. So welcome and please give us feedback. This is our first time doing the screencast with it. We received a number of feedback to say that it would be great if we could see your screen on the for folks rewatching the show. So we will be streaming this through YouTube, and then we'll also be providing a link to it afterwards for folks that missed the show. So enjoy, and I guess we can get started.
Indeed. Thanks, Bob. And thank you to Bob also for getting everything set up today for the streaming. He's been testing and working hard on getting this set up going for us. So I appreciate all your time in that. And also just wanted to quickly thank everyone who's watching and listening, and hope everybody's doing well out there in this current environment. Hopefully we will soon be past this current state of affairs, and COVID-19 will be behind us. But hope everybody's doing well right now.
Yep. Cheers to that.
Cheers. So on the agenda for today, as I had mentioned before, we're going to be doing an overview of the Jakarta EE Adopt a Spec program. This is a new program that has just recently been started, and I'm going to give an update on that. Also want to mention the Jakarta WebSocket specification. This is an open source spec that is part of the Jakarta EE platform. So I'll dig into it just a little bit. Won't be really modifying any code, as I am not really a committer or an expert on this one per se, but I do know a little bit about it, and so I'll show you an example and how you can get started contributing if you'd like. And then after I get done with that, Bob will be going through Apache Jackrabbit. So we've got a lot in store for you today. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. If you have any questions along the way, please do feel free to ask, and let's get this thing started. And let me go forward in the slides instead of backwards. So let's modify some code. So first off, we're not going to modify any code. We're going to take a look at the Jakarta EE Adopt a Spec program. So what this entails is it's actually a new program that has been started by the Eclipse Foundation, and it is basically for JUGs and JUG members to start getting involved with the Jakarta EE process here a little bit. And by doing so, you can adopt a Jakarta EE specification. And the objective is just to increase the developer level participation in the evolution of the spec and of the platform in general. And so any JUG leaders listening out there, There are a couple of ways on this website here that can point you in the right direction to get started with ensuring that you can adopt a Jakarta EE spec. And also the same holds true for members. And just to list off for the members here, how you can get involved. Let me make this a little bit bigger. If you can see my browser there now, you might be able to read along. How you can get involved, members, is you can take part in the spec development, API specification documents, TCK. This doesn't mean you have to like commit code or program anything with respect to the APIs, but you can also, review, test, make sure that everything's working correctly, and review the documentation. Also provide documentation. This even would go out to giving presentations about these different specifications, or providing examples. Maybe you want to write an article about it, or write a blog post. That's the next thing that you can do, is write a blog about the specification, add it onto the Jakarta blogs listing. Now this is a newer blog site at jakartablogs.ee. And I just pulled it up here, and what you can see is this is just a rolling blog with lots of posts regarding Jakarta EE. Lots of people, such as Adam Bean and Otavio Santana, have linked their blogs to this Jakarta EE rollup. And so anytime they post, it just kind of gets added in here. So it's a great place to go for lots of content on Jakarta EE. And if you wanted to help, uh, you know, guide people in the right direction towards one of the specifications, you could certainly write a post about that and get it added to this blog post. You can also promote the specification on Twitter or other social media. That's a good way to get involved. Just helping to get the word out there. Here's a specification or Jakarta EE progress process that I'm interested in, and here's how you can take a look at it and provide comments. That's good. Like I had mentioned before, you can write examples or write a full end-to-end test web application, such as the pet store for Jakarta EE. Remember, back in the day, or still right now, is the Java EE pet store. That's a big application that is out there. Lots of people have used it to help get themselves started, and this needs to be ported over to Jakarta EE, so it can also help do that. Uh, and even such things as just reading the specification and comments. So lots of different ways to get started here. Just to give you a quick understanding of the different specifications we're talking about, let's take a look at these Jakarta EE specifications, and I'll just quickly name them off. So one of the specs is the platform itself. This is the umbrella spec that covers all of the different specifications that are part of Jakarta EE. There's the web profile. Then there's activation, which defines a set of standard services to determine MIME type of an arbitrary piece of data, encapsulate access to it, or discover operations available on it. There's annotations. There's the authentication specification, authorization, Jakarta batch, bean validation, concurrency, connectors, context and dependency injection, or CDI, debugging support for other languages. This kind of goes into providing a mechanism for other programs executed under the JVM, but written in other languages, can be debugged and work along with Jakarta. We also have Jakarta dependency injection, deployment, enterprise beans, enterprise web services, expression language, interceptors, JSON binding, JSON processing, Jakarta Mail, which lots of people have been using over the years. Used to be Java Mail, now Jakarta Mail, Jakarta Managed Beans, management, messaging, persistence, RESTful Web Services, or JAX-RS, better known as, security, Jakarta Server Faces, or JSF, JSP, or also now known as Jakarta Server Pages, Servlet, SOAP with attachments, JSTL, or Jakarta Standard Tag Library, transactions, web services and metadata, WebSocket, which we'll talk a little bit about more here in a few minutes, XML binding, XML registries, XML RPC, and last but not least, XML web services specification. So I think there's just about something there for everyone who's interested in, contributing or starting off with providing more documentation on one of these specs. So you should go out there and take a look at the different specifications, try and find one that interests you, and also just to kind of give you a little bit of information about the Jakarta EE specification process, I put a link into the slide deck, which we'll make available, and it goes to this web page, which tells you how the Jakarta EE specification process works. This is a new spec process that was developed last year in 2019 as part of the Jakarta EE platform. So, it's still very much new, and actually the first um, release through the specification process was Jakarta EE 8, and Jakarta EE 9 is due out here, I believe, in September. And that also follows this process. So more to come on that. So anyway, to wrap things up here on this, to go ahead and sign up, you can send an email to this. Actually, what you need to do is provide the following information: the name of the spec you wish to adopt, a URL to the JUG's website if you're a JUG leader, along with the JUG logo, and then you create a pull request. It's not an email. You'll create a pull request to this Jakarta Adopt a Spec program here, and it will let them know that you want to adopt that particular specification. You can also join the Adopt a Spec Slack channel, which is here on the website. So if you have any more information that you'd like to find out about this, you can feel free to ping me. I'll give you more info about it, or just go to this website, take a look. It's definitely a good way to get started with Jakarta EE.
Yep. And as just having participated in the Adopted JSR program through CJUG, it's a great way for getting your Java user group more recognition. Josh and we won an award for our participation in Adopt a JCR.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as a JUG leader, you're wondering, hey, why can't we get the big name speakers or the people to come to our meetup? Getting involved in these sort of things is one way to help drive that participation and kind of get yourself put on the map. So definitely suggest
Indeed.
looking into it.
Definitely. All right. Well, like I said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ping me or, put a comment into this meetup or however you want to do it. We'll get back to you. Okay. So next up, I wanted to just touch base upon what's going on with Jakarta WebSocket. So for those of you who are not familiar, this is a way to send and receive messages with the server, basically between client and server. So a client application can, web page, let's say, can send a message to the server. Server can do something with that message and then provide a response. And that's kind of how a WebSocket works. It's an open channel of communication. So once it's open, it can stay open. And a good example of that would be like a chat room or something. So you would connect to a WebSocket endpoint that would open a chat dialog, and then you can just slam messages back and forth with this open channel. The WebSocket does provide support for binary messages or text, and our two primary packages in the API. One of them is the Jakarta WebSocket.server package, and it includes annotations, classes, and interfaces to create and configure server endpoints. And then there's the Jakarta WebSocket package, which contains annotations, classes, interfaces, and exceptions that are common for both the client and server endpoints. So To get started, I'll just kind of show you a little demo. There are a couple of different types of endpoints that you can create with Jakarta WebSocket. I'm only going to show you an annotated endpoint. However, that doesn't mean that by any means you can't program the thing if you wanted to. Let me actually show you an example if I can. I've got some links here that I'm going to refer to a little bit. So let me pull up this. That's the specification process link again. Okay, hold on a second. Get this documentation up here. What this is actually the documentation on the Jakarta EE tutorial for WebSockets. And so let me see if I can make that a little bigger. And then if I go to the first example here, that's a programmatic endpoint. So a programmatic endpoint, basically, you have to define the different lifecycle methods, which are on open, on close, on error. And you have to implement at least one of the methods. In this case, they implement the on message method uh, inside of this inner class, and on open is actually implemented here. It's an abstract method in the endpoint class. And so this basically would create an endpoint. And if you look here, about 3/4 of the way down the page, it shows you how you can set up this endpoint. Right here, you would set this endpoint class equal to this path of echo. So anytime you visited that um, URL in your browser, it would send that text to the endpoint, and then basically it would echo that text back to you. So this is how you would create a programmatic endpoint. You'd have to extend the endpoint interface and or class, abstract class actually, and then implement these methods. Um, it's a little bit of text here, a little bit of programming you have to do, a little bit more than using the annotated method. So let me show you what I've done here uh, in NetBeans. One of the examples that I've gotten written for one of my books here is a WebSocket endpoint that uses a JavaScript button. Um, and I'm going to go ahead and just run this so you can see what it does here first. And then we'll go ahead and um, take a look at the code. So if I look at this WebSocket endpoint here, can ignore those error messages you get at first. It's just basically a button that says WebSocket test message. And when I click it, it says, yeah, WebSocket's supported by your browser. So I'll click OK. It tells me the message is sent. And now I've got a message from the server. It says message received. Here's my message. So let's see what I actually did here. So if I take a look at that web page, you can see what I've got here is just a button, HTML button, and the value here is WebSocket test message, which is printed on the button itself. When you click it, it goes ahead and calls upon this book chat relay. This is just straight JavaScript. What I'm doing here is I'm first making sure WebSocket will work in my browser. If it does, then I print that message, WebSocket supported by your browser. Now, we're in 2020, and I really hope you're using a browser that WebSocket is supported in at this point. Most browsers do support WebSockets at this point. I think you find it few and far between that do not. However, it may be a good idea just to run this actually in an if block just to make sure. So you can handle it gracefully if the client does not. So the next thing you would do is open this JavaScript WebSocket. And what I do is I point it to this endpoint. It's called book chat endpoint, which I'm going to open up for you here in a second. And once that opens, then what I do is I send a message to it. And the message I send is, here is my message. Okay, this gets sent to the WebSocket endpoint. And then what it does is it sits and it waits. And once it's received a message or a response back from the server, it will go ahead and print this message. So in this case here, what I'm doing is I'm adding that data to this received message, and then I just append it to a string, which I threw out in the alert dialog. So it just says message from server, and then it blasts that message back. Once it is closed, it will tell me the connection is closed, which I'll show you here in a second. So let's take a look at this endpoint here so that you can see what the server side code actually looks like. So this is a very straightforward endpoint, and this shows you how much simpler it is to use the annotation support. All I basically have to do is use this server endpoint annotation, and I provide the path that I want to use to get to my endpoint right here in the value attribute. And then all I have to do here is actually implement this on message method, which will go ahead and be called once a message is sent to the WebSocket endpoint and received. So, when we send our message, it is brought in as a string here. If we wanted to make this binary, you could certainly do that, make it into a byte array or something. You could do that. Right here, we're just using text. And what it's going to do is just return another string. If we wanted to do some error handling, we could write a method that is annotated, with on air. And what that would do is it would call upon that method if there was ever an error that was encountered. And then we could handle, processing nicely there for that error. So very straightforward to create an endpoint and a client. And not much to it. Um, and very easy to use. So just to give you an example of some other highlights of using Jakarta WebSocket, if you wanted to get into the finer granularity of the API, it does provide the ability to maintain state. So between different messages, you can retain state about some message that came previously, if you wanted to, for instance. There's encoding and decoding. So by this, I'm talking about, you could uh, take from take a Java class or Java object, let's say, and convert it into XML or JSON, and then you could decode it back the other way. Take that uh, JSON and put it into a Java object. So it goes back and forth and talks nicely, a lot like JSON binding. It accepts path parameters. So back to that earlier example I gave you when I was talking about one reason you may want to use a WebSocket, like a chat room. So let's say you've got a chat endpoint and you want to support multiple rooms. Maybe you want to append the name of your room onto that endpoint. That would be a way to do it. You can use a path parameter to say, hey, let me into the Jakarta EE room, or let me into the Spring room or the Java SE room. And all you would have to do is if you take a look at my endpoint here, a path parameter would just basically, just like Jax RS, put in the curly braces there at the end of your URL and or your path, excuse me, and it would bring that in. Okay. Uh, Also, like I had mentioned briefly, you can annotate a method with on air, and that would perform some error handling. And there's also something known as an endpoint configurator. What this is just like a filter class, really, that will get called whenever a message is received or when it's being sent back. And you can, you know, provide some deep cleansing to the messages, or add something to the message every time it goes back and forth, some kind of configuration that is specific to your application. So that's something you can do there. Um, how can you get started with this thing? Well, you can go to the project site, and let me bring that thing up for you so you can see what that looks like. course, there's the tutorial I showed you that will give you information about how to actually use the API. If you go to the Jakarta EE, Jakarta WebSocket site, gives you lots of information about the latest release. Hey, 2.0, it's released in the beginning of April. So 2.0, it's actually the namespace change for Jakarta. So now instead of using JavaX namespace, it's using Jakarta namespace. So this is going to be used for Jakarta EE9. If you go to the downloads tab, there aren't any really downloads that you can get there, but you can go to the developer resources tab, and actually you can find the EE4J project and the GitHub repository for Jakarta WebSocket. So if I click on that thing here, it takes me into GitHub. You can just easily go ahead and clone this project to get started, pull it down to your machine. You can see that there's the API here, and there's the spec. You have to pull both of them down and build them together as part of your project. If you open up the API, then you can see that there's client and then there's server. These are all separated out. So if you want to work with the client, you can just go to the client package, and in there, you'll find the code dealing with the client. And then, as I had mentioned before, with the other package is the server side package here. And here we've got the Jakarta WebSocket server package that contains Java classes pertaining to server usage. So you can easily download this thing by cloning the GitHub repository. And here I've opened it in my NetBeans environment. Unfortunately, I can't make the text any bigger in the menu, so bear with me. But what I've done here is this is what the project would look like if you open it up, just Jakarta WebSocket, and you'll see the different modules come over with it. You've got the API and the specification, and I can just double click on that API to open up the project here. And once I do that, you can see now I've got access to these WebSocket classes here. So if I wanted to do modifications or whatnot. And it's easy to build the project here in NetBeans, especially just, or actually I shouldn't say especially, NetBeans in my case, but we should work in Eclipse or IntelliJ or whichever editor is of your choice. Just build it once you get it, and it should build the box. Now, I did have a funny case with mine where once I built it, I was unable to open the actual projects, the underlying projects, till I closed out of NetBeans and opened it back up. Maybe that would work better in Eclipse or one of the other IDEs. I'm not sure, or maybe it's just you know because I built it and they had to be refreshed. I didn't really go too far into it, but suffice it to say, after I opened the NetBeans editor again, I was able to open the projects separately and I could start working on it. So if you wanted to dig into code or even the specification and start to build that, this would be a way to do it. Pull it down. You can open the ASCII doc for the specification and get started working on it or reviewing it that way as well. Another thing you can do is probably want to get involved with the mailing list. So I'm not going to jump around here, but there's a WebSocket dev mailing list that you can get into that's all on the project website. You can find all the information about that there. Also, there's the EE4J Tyrus project, which is actually a default implementation of the Jakarta WebSocket specification. So if you wanted to get involved in that particular project, you could do that as well, the Tyrus project. So I think that's about all I have for you today with respect to Jakarta WebSocket. Like I said, kept it kind of high level, show you a couple examples, give you a couple of pointers in the right direction if you're interested in getting started to use it or to contribute to it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm here. And at this point, Bob, if you want to go ahead and take over and we'll go to the Jackrabbit, that'd be great. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Sounds great. Thanks, Josh. Can you hear me
Thank you.
okay?
I'm hearing you perfect.
All right. Yeah, no, I really like the direction they're going in. It looks like they're really taking it to look a lot more like controller logic within the screens. So, um, mappings, and it feels a lot more natural where instead of binding, to those on handler methods. So I like the direction it's going in. So,
Yeah, definitely.
all right. So let's talk about Apache Jackrabbit. So Apache Jackrabbit is an Apache project that's been around, oh man, I want to say it's 10 plus years. And it's basically to give you kind of a high level overview of what Jackrabbit is. It is everything you wish your file system did that it didn't, or you can even think of it as kind of a precursor to a lot of these NoSQL databases. But it evolved out of two JSRs, JSR 170 and JSR 283, which are the Java Content Repository JSRs. So these did go through the JCP, and Apache Jackrabbit is the Apache licensed implementation of those specs. So Jackrabbit essentially comes in two flavors. There's the original Apache Jackrabbit project, which again is a JCR specification based project that stores files, content, puts any kind of metadata in a storage system. Could be a database, could be a tarball, could be a just sitting in memory. And it's optimized. Jackrabbit, the original, is very much optimized for kind of your old school websites where when you publish content, it's out there, it's very read optimized, it's fast at querying the data, it's fast at searching the data, but maybe not quite as fast at writing to. So later on, they created a new project instead of rewriting Jackrabbit, which is called Apache Jackrabbit Oak, which kind of balances out a lot of the read-write concerns. So if you have a content-based website, content-based application, where you have a number of users that are writing probably just as much as they're reading, the Oak system has a lot more fine-tuning around that type of interaction. So I'm going to go through just kind of the basic steps of how you interact with Jackrabbit, and then we'll get into sort of the open source contribution part of the show, where I'm going to walk through the example I'm going to do is actually upgrading some of the libraries within Jackrabbit, Oak specifically. One of the interesting things about Jackrabbit, with it being kind of one of the older projects that is on Subversion still, so the contribution workflow for Jackrabbit is a little bit different than a Git-based project. Now, you can still do, issue pull requests. I believe they have it out there in the Apache. They have a mirror. But I'm actually going to demonstrate how to do patches in Subversion, since that might be something that developers haven't done before in order to contribute to projects that are not on Git, even though it is kind of the exception rather than the rule these days. All right. So let's start with let's actually start with some code, because I think it's very helpful just to kind of show some of the code interaction, just to get all of this started. So if I were going to run an application that used Apache Jackrabbit, so I'm going to bounce open Eclipse. What would I need to do in order to start working with this repository? So let me make that a little bit bigger. So conceptually, a Jackrabbit project has a repository object, which gives you access to the actual persistence repository, and then you log in to that repository. So you place a credential, and logging in gives you a session. So very familiar if you're working with most authentication systems. If it's a Java EE system, when you log in, you get a session. So this works on very similar conventions. Your session allows you to interact with the content repository. So if I'm going to if I get a session back out of the repository, I can request the root node. Now the node is a good way of thinking. One good way of thinking about the node in a way that's probably familiar to most people is think of this as the root of your file system. So slash in your file system, or C:, if you're on a Windows-based system. And what that gives you access to is that specific folder that exists in the file system. Now, nodes within JCR can be a bunch of different things. They don't have to be folders. But as a starting point, that's a great way to think about how you interact with it. You've got kind of a database-like session or a Java EE-like session where I'm able to see my changes and work with the content, and then I'm working within a file structure. So if I wanted to add, let's say, either an item or a folder to my root directory, how would I do that? Well, the simplest way to do it is actually to start with the access to the root object and then call add node. So off of root, I can call the method add node. I can, with the first parameter, provide the name of that node, which I'm saying is hello1. I can provide the type of that node. So within the JCR, much like a SQL database, if I want to, I can provide the structure of that data or a schema that this node is going to meet. And if it doesn't meet that node, I will get an exception when I try to add a node that doesn't, or when I try to save a node that doesn't meet that specification. So I'm saying it's an unstructured node, which gives me a lot of leeway on how I want to do this. So think a NoSQL document database that's not really enforcing anything. My NT unstructured, NT for node type, :unstructured is the node type I can give just a generic node. Now, at this point, it's a leaf node. So it's just a kind of a node that's just sitting off of the root. Now I can also add nodes to my node. So if I was going to add another one, I could call add node on the hello object that's created, and then add world at the end of it, NT unstructured as the type. And I don't have to provide a type. I can use just this method without a type if I wanted to delete this. It still works. It just provides a primary type itself as unstructured. And then within those objects, so these are nodes, so it's a great way to think of them as folders or objects that have hierarchy on each other. So if I were to access the world object, I would first have to go through the root / then hello1/world, and then I'd be at the world object. I can also set properties on these objects. So these are think attributes to a file, or attributes of an XML file. So these properties would have a name value pair. So the name of this property would be message, and the value of that property would be hello world ! So this is very much based off of the first hops tutorial on the JCR on the Apache Jackrabbit website. So once I have this all set up, just like in a database where you're setting up a transaction, until I commit that transaction, it's not actually persisted and saved. It just exists within my session. So if I want other people to be able to see my changes, I have to actually save my session. And that's what causes this object structure to be committed to the Java content repository. So then it can be viewed. So if I wanted to then go back, and let's say I had a separate session or somebody else looking for it, I could make a request off the root node to get node hello1/world, and I can print the path and the message string off of it, and it would retrieve successfully. While I'm working within my own session, I don't necessarily have to call save in order to be able to retrieve things, because I'm working off of the same session. But for other people to see it, I need to do that. I can also remove nodes by calling a get node and remove. But that's another thing I also have to save in order for it to be actually persist to the database. And then once I'm done with my session, I can log out. If I don't log out, it's very much like a Java EE session. It becomes sort of a memory concern. If I leave my sessions open too long, they do consume resources on the server. So this is kind of the approach to the Java content repository if I'm running code inside the application that has the repository. So basically my Java process is the database, and I'm writing, you could even look at them as stored procedures that run inside the database process. This is only one way to access the JCR. The JCR is also accessible externally. So I'm going to fire up my own JCR. So here's my content window where I've got my JCR started up. So what I've got here is basically the standalone jar that comes in the project. So you can't, again, just like Josh with NetBeans, it's hard to see the hierarchy on the side. But there is this Oak standalone under the Oak Examples project that will allow you to basically use its Spring Boot application that actually runs an OSGI runtime inside of it. So don't tell Michael Manella. He'll freak out over that. But it runs basically a Java content repository with some simple HTTP interactions that you can access it with. So if I were to want to interact with this Spring Boot application that started up, I could do it with, say, curl. So let's take a look at the command line here. So if I wanted to, let's say, let's upload some content. So here, I'm making a curl request to upload content to the Hello One on this remote repository. And I'm doing it from an XML file. So I'm porting this XML file in on this request. Well, let's take a look at what's in this XML file. So it's very much like our initial, where I'm saying the node's name is hello. I'm providing a message property with a value. And then I'm also supplying a date property. And this has structure, so you can supply types for what type of a property it is. So when we upload this, and my command succeeds, I can now show, let's take a look. So if I go to my localhost, so this is my Spring Boot app running at localhost, I can see that there's now this hello named node right off of the repository root path. I can't see any of the properties in this view, but if I want to see some of the properties, I can run another curl just to grab that. So within this application, if I do hello.json, it will render these properties as JSON. Oops, you guys can't see that on the stream. Let me fix that. Okay. So you can see that I can see that that content that I uploaded there. Now that's kind of interesting if I was just looking at a NoSQL database. But let's say I wanted to do a little bit more, and I wanted to put like a PowerPoint file up there. So one thing I can do is I can actually use WebDAV to connect to my repository. So here, if I refresh, I should be able to see my hello path. But if I wanted to say upload a PowerPoint file, I could go into hello and I could upload a PowerPoint file. And now my PowerPoint file is also in the JCR. This could work with images. This could work with text files. And the JCR is going to actually do some interesting things with my file. So I sent a PPTX file, which is a Microsoft Windows PowerPoint file. Now what happens if I go into basically take a look at it in the command line now. Let's say I want to take a look at this JSON. We'll see that the hello JSON now also includes some child attributes. So in here, it actually parses and determines the MIME type of that presentation, and it can pull out other things too. Now, one of the things that allows it to detect the MIME type is one of the other libraries that I'm a PMC member of, which is Apache Tika. So Apache Tika actually is a library within Apache Jackrabbit, both Oak and the original, that will parse the binary content of the files and assign them the MIME type. And Oak Jackrabbit uses this in order to put metadata about the files that you have uploaded into the content repository and puts that in the structure. So unlike your file system where maybe I can just search by an extension, Tika puts some information in there that may even allow me to query based on, well, what's the JCR MIME type of this? So get me all of the files that meet this MIME type, whether they end in PPT or PPTX or any of the formats that or file extensions I could put on a PowerPoint. This is actually going on the actual file content. Now, there's other things that come out of there that you can parse on if you configure Tika to do so. Not going to get into all of those options right now, but this is kind of the basic use cases around the JCR. You've got a file system, you have data that you can push to it, so it comes out in sort of a JSON-y like structure, but a hierarchical structure, which can also include files with file attributes, so I can modify this and add other attributes if I want to search on those attributes. I can use the search technology, which again, with Jackrabbit, I have different search technologies I can plug in. I can either use Lucene, which is available in the original Apache Jackrabbit project, or the Oak distribution also has it where you can plug in Elastic or Solar. So let's take a look at something a little bit more advanced. But before I move on, any questions about Jackrabbit? Just kind of the basics.
Hey, Bob, I've got a question.
Sure.
Is it transactional? Like, what happens if I send it something big and
and it fails, right? So if I don't actually save my session, if I'm unable to save it, then that change exists in my session, but it doesn't actually get saved back. So it does, the session save does make it a bit transactional in nature. I think there are more advanced API usages with transactions, but the most simple thing is, if you're doing a bunch of stuff and you don't actually save it, or if it crashes before you call save, it does that data is not committed in that sense.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. So what I'm going to cover now is, again, one of the more interesting things about this is it's on Subversion. So I'm going to cover how a patch process works within Subversion within the project. And then we'll go into basically just upgrading. So one of the common use cases and one of the fun things about using open source is you can upgrade it to use more advanced features prior to the community actually doing that, if that is important to you. So let's say there's a new feature in Tika to parse a new file type that's come out or been added to the Tika library, and I want to take advantage of that in Oak. How would I go about doing that within an open source project? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it down. So within Eclipse, you have the ability to pull down SVN repositories just like you do Git repositories. So here I have basically the SVN repo at the apache.org site for Jackrabbit. And when I go into that, I'm going to basically be able to see the repository structure. So unlike Git, where you have the branches and the tags are kind of outside the file structure, with SVN, you end up seeing the file structure in here. So here's all my branches. So if I wanted to check out the 1.0 branch, I would check out this branch, and that has the project structure below it. There's also tags in here if I want to just look at the release stuff. If I want to look at what's out right now, I can look at trunk. I've checked out the most recent tag into my repository. And I know the screen is a little bit difficult to read on the left-hand side, but for Oak, this is 1.260 is the most recent release at this point. So within an SVN project, I would end up going into tags, and then I'd check out basically the Oak 1.26.0 folder, and then I would get all of the project source code related to that release within Subversion. Now, if I wanted to upgrade Tika, Tika is just one of many libraries that's used within the Oak project. But most larger Apache projects that use Maven have this idea of what's called a parent POM that stores all the versions. So I'm going to open the Oak parent POM. And within the Oak parent POM, I can see different versions that are set up as properties. And if I were to go down into the projects that are using it, I would see $ open curly brace Tika version, close curly brace. And that would basically pull in this Maven property so that all the versions within Apache Jackrabbit Oak are going to be the same version of Tika. This makes upgrading a lot easier too. So not only are the subprojects getting the same version, I now have one place where I can do this upgrade. So Tika recently released a 1.241 version. So if there's a feature in there that I want to take advantage of, I can simply upgrade the parent POM and then build the project. So I'm just going to build to start with just the parent POM because I don't want to go through and build the entire project yet in order to see this change. But what I will want to do, if I'm making a change like this, I will want to test it to make sure it works. One risk I take upgrading beyond where they've released that version is it may not work. So since I might be using Tika or this Oak within an OSGI container, since that's the popular way that it's deployed, they actually have this Oak IT OSGI project, which basically starts Oak up in an OSGI container and makes sure that it works through running some integration tests. So since I upgraded Tika, there's actually a Tika extract OSGI integration test that I can use here. And the way this works is I simply have to build the integration test project. So I'll install and assemble. It doesn't actually run through the regular build process. And then I can, within my IDE, I can run the JUnit. So I've upgraded Tika. I'm now running the build so that I can run this integration test locally within Eclipse. So once that's built with 1.1 or with Tika 1.24.1, I can run, well, actually, I think I have it already up here, the Tika extract OSGI test in JUnit. So here's my JUnit. It's running. Ooh, and it looks like we have a failure. Not shocking. When you upgrade a kit or a library, it's always possible you're bringing in a bunch of other new libraries. So what might cause this to fail? So in here, I'm getting a class not found exception. If I look at my stack trace here, class not found, it looks like it's in common langs 3, mutable set int not found. So one of the things I can look at is this specific integration test. So is using, all I did was upgrade Tika. So what I can do is I could go out to my my Maven repository and let me see if I can find commons in here. Commons IO. So it must be, if I can, oh, so commons lang 3 is at version 3.10 within this one. Now the integration test sets up basically an OSGI container within the source code and then pulls in versions from a properties file. So it's got some properties that store the versions related to the libraries that it pulls into the OSGI container. As we can see, Commons Lang is at 3.9. So if I change this, and then we have to rebuild, actually, I don't think I have to rebuild if I just change the properties file. I think this works without it. Okay, so the build was successful. I'm going to rerun my test. Let's go back to JUnit. All right, and we can see my test is now successful. Well, let's take this a step further. Knowing what I know about Tika, I know that there were actually some problems found recently within the PowerPoint specifically on that version of Tika. So what I've done is I've actually added another test file, PowerPoint test file, to the source test resources directory. And I'm going to modify this test now so that it also tests the PowerPoint file in this version. So if I scroll down, they've got basically just some very simple test methods, and they just basically assert that, so let's call this PowerPoint, and it's Tika test pptx, and we'll save it there. So now I'm going to add this PowerPoint test to the equation. So let's run our test one more time and see if it works with the PowerPoint file. Oh, it did, but that's because I forgot to rebuild it. So ideally, it should fail because there is an issue with Tika at 1.24.1 that we should hit here. All right, so let's run the test. It's going to make me look silly. It's actually passing. So what I was hoping to actually, let me see if there's a reason why it's passing. It should actually fail here. Because what I was looking to show is that we can also upgrade to future releases where it's fixed. So the snapshot release is where the bug is fixed in the PPT project. So let me run. I wonder if it only exists here on the newer ones. I don't think that's the case. But let's go in. So the other thing is on the newer version of Tika, we've actually, oh, I know what the problem is. Well, it passed for one reason, and that's because I didn't also upgrade the version of Poi. So within Tika, Poi should also be changed. I just changed the Commons Lang version without changing Poi. So let's go back and fix that. Let's downgrade back. Now I can get it to fail. All right, and we are at 1 o'clock, so if folks do need to drop, in order to get back to work on time. That's fine. I'm going to continue. I've just got a few more minutes just to get through this. So if you can, bear with me. If not, I totally understand. All right, now we're launching our test. And we have I need to rebuild too.
Hey, Bob, it looks like we have a question here
Oh,
from
sure.
Greg. He says, it seems like the versions.properties is a flaw to the testing if it's not staying in sync with the parent POM versions.
So there's a reason that it is in that properties file. I think it's because they're setting up an OSGI container, and they want to be able to test with specific versions in there that are separate from the Maven versions. Now there are ways to pull those versions in from Maven, so I think you're right. They could drive those off of Maven properties within the test, and that may be a point to bring up with the project team, that it may be better if they do that, if they're looking to use the same exact versions in the runtime as they are in the build script. But if they are trying to pin to specific runtime versions, separating would make sense in that case. So it's hard to say which is all of these are blowing up now. So the demo gods are not in my favor today. It's saying Poi can't be downloaded. I must be on some network where I can't get to it.
I think you may have the wrong Poi number. I don't know. It flashed on the screen quickly.
I flipped it.
412, I think.
412.
Right?
Good eye,
yeah,
Josh.
there we go.
Good eye.
Sorry about that.
Yep. Let's just try rerunning. I rebuilt because I thought that was the case, but it should actually work without rebuilding. Okay, now we get the actual expected error in the PowerPoint file. So this is the error I was expecting. So what we can do to fix this is we can upgrade to the snapshot version, which is what the version it's fixed in. And the other thing we have to do within their code is they're actually using Tika parsers. The fix for this, and the Oak community is probably going to realize this, or they're going to have to OSGI another bundle, is that the Tika bundle is where we wrap all of the parser dependencies together. So I'm actually going to change the OSGI runtime to use Tika bundle, as well as changing to the most recent version. So once this builds, I'm going to run it, and then hopefully we should have a fix, in which case we can cut our patch. All right, so we have it building. We'll run our test and see if we have it fixed. So we're now using the latest snapshot from the Tika bundle with our PowerPoint. And good. Our tests are passing again. So at this point, now that I have passing tests, if I wanted to submit a PR on this, with SVN, I don't have a PR process like I do with Git. So what I can do within Eclipse is I can actually create a patch, which is going to be a file that I can send to the project team. So from here, if I click on the source directory of the Jackrabbit Oak project, I can go in and click on this Create Patch button. And what that's going to do is just like a git commit, it's going to bring up all the different things it changes. Now there's a lot of noise in here, so I'm going to eliminate all of the noise. And then I'm just going to focus on, okay, I didn't actually want to change anything in there. Okay, but this has the updated versions. This has my added test. This has the version properties update, and this has the parent property updates. So I'm going to keep all of these. I can click next. Oops. I want to save it to workspace, so I'll probably name this something like, oops, not in the workspace. Let's do it in the file system. Let's save it to the desktop. So here's my Tika patch. I'm going to hit save, hit next. The patch root I'm going to have as the project, and I'm going to click finish. And then if I go open that up, it's going to have all of the deltas, and that file is what I'm going to actually attach to the Jira to send to my to the project team. Now those files don't generally carry binaries very well, so if I want to do this, I should also send my my PowerPoint file along in the Jira in order for that to get to the project team so they can commit that. But that's basically the difference that you have if you're dealing with SVN, is you're going to create the patch, and then the patch is what you're going to send within the Jira to the Apache project team. Any questions on SVN, upgrading releases, running and failing at unit testing? All right, well, that's all I had today. Josh, I give it back to you if you'd like to wrap anything up, if you had any questions.
Sure, thanks. That was a great presentation. I've never really used Jackrabbit before, so very interesting. I appreciate you. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. As you know, you can always learn more by, if you're not a member of the Chicago JUG, the CJUG, join Chicago Java Users Group. There's always great presentations, and recently in this current environment, we've started to do online meetups. So if you pay attention to the meetup page for CJUG, you can see the different meetups that are being posted, and join online if there's a virtual meeting in session. Also, you can listen to the Pubhouse Network. We've got Off Heap, the Java Pubhouse podcast, which is Bob and Freddie, always teaching new things. And then, of course, breaking into open source, as you're hearing here. And we do have the Stacked podcast as well. So we appreciate you joining today. If you have any questions, definitely follow up with us, and we will get back to you on those. All right. So for now, thanks, Bob. This is Josh signing off. I appreciate it.
All right, Bob signing off. Stay safe and stay well, everybody.
Indeed. Thank you.
All right, thanks.